Oh, there you go. I want to read with you guys some writings on two grounds. This is this kind of research, okay, but I think it's good to start some discussions on how to read a poem and how to comment a poem, or analysis of poems. So we have a bunch of people here. So we're going to start with the first one, as he said, is to see how to read a poem by poets.org. So called one poetry. Okay, we're gonna have Justin, Noah, and me read on this essay. Next one we'll select another round of people to read this. So we have been trying to start how young ones, especially new ones, come to appreciate poems. I know you guys helping with the commenting on the poems as well. And I think it's good to have some basic idea how others do it. So we have been doing it randomly and to learn, at least have some theoretical background to do this. Now I do want to, before we do that, I'm talking about the essay assignment. We didn't do essay assignment last time. So I hope anyone have some idea about how to do the next essay. We're gonna take 2 weeks to write an essay. Anybody have ideas? Benji? Off your chart. You still in crown now. Any idea on my essay?
Trying to think of something that we haven't done.
Yeah.
Maybe have we done obedience?
Oh, I don't think we did that one. Did we? That's big topic, man. It's hard topic. Obedience. That's a good one. So, no, what do you think? Hold on. Find your word list. 2 weeks. Okay. Okay, that's a good topic. It's big topic. So, obedience it is. Hallelujah. I like that. So let's start with reading these 2 essays, and then we move on, wrap up today. So, hallelujah. Justin, why don't you pray for us, brother? Thank you for being here today.
Lord, we do thank you, Lord, that we have the opportunity certainly to gather. Lord, we do pray for unity of mind and heart. Lord, not just in our the studies that we apply ourselves to, Lord, but in our communion with one another, Lord, as your sons. Lord, what greater purpose than to be gathered together in your name, in your purposes, to discuss even and discern your heart through the written word, through poems. I'm reminded, Lord, that even in your word, you call us your poema, your masterpiece. Lord, I do pray that as we study together and learn even how to read poems, how to interpret poems, how to discuss poems, Lord, that we would engage in living poetic lives that serve your purpose towards your aim. And so in this light, we just pray for your favor, your grace, and your mercy as we walk together and learn together and grow together. We thank you for it in Jesus' name.
In Jesus' name. Leanne, aren't you cold? No. You guys are crazy, man. That guy wears shorts. It's incredible. It's winter. Northwest. Okay. Let's start with the poets.org, this article called How to Read a Poem. Let me start with then Noah, then Justin. Then we have girls read it for us. We have 3 girls. Okay, read the next essay. Only 3. Yelene disappeared on us. Okay, Yelene's back. Okay. Yelene, we're going to do this how to read a poem here. So you're welcome to be here. How to read a poem by poets.org. I'm going to start here. Reading poetry well is a part attitude and a part technique. Curiosity is useful attitudes, especially it's a freedom for preconceived ideas about what poetry is or should be. Effective technique direct your curiosity into asking questions, drawing you into a conversation with a poem. The goal of careful reading is often to take up a question for meaning, an interpretive question that has more than one answer, since the form of a poem is a part of the meaning. For example, features such as repetition, the rhyme may amplify or extend the meaning of a word or idea, adding emphasis, texture, or dimension. Questions about the form and technique, about the observable features of poem, provide an effective point of entry for interpretation. To ask some of these questions, you will need to develop a good ear for the musical quality for language, particularly how song and the rhyme relate to meaning. This approach is one of the many ways into a poem. Getting started, prior assumptions. Most readers make three false assumptions when addressing an unfamiliar poem. The first is assuming that they should understand what they encounter on the first reading. If they don't, then something's wrong with them or with the poem. The second is assuming that a poem is a kind of a code, that each detail can respond to one and only one thing. And unless they can crack this code, they'll miss the point. The third is assume that a poem can mean anything readers want it to mean. William Carlos Williams wrote words addressed to his wife in the poem January Morning. All this was for you, old woman. I want to write a poem that you would understand. But what good is it to me if you can't understand it? But you got to try hard. Williams admits in this line that a poetry is often difficult. He also says that a poet depends on the effort of a reader. Somehow a reader must complete what the poet has begun. This act of completion begins when you enter the meditative play of a poem. Bring to it your experience, the point of view. If a poem is a play in the sense of a game on a sport, then you enjoy that it makes you work a little, that it makes you sweat a little. Reading poetry is a challenge. But like so many other things, it takes practice and your skills and insight improve as you progress. Literature is and has always been the sharing of experience, the pulling of human understanding about living, loving, and dying. Successful poems welcome you in, revealing ideas that may not have been foremost in the writer's mind in the moment of composition. The best poetry has magical quality, a sense of being more than the sum is the parts, that even when it's impossible to articulate the sense to something more, the power of the poem is left undiminished. Poems speak to us in many ways. So the form will not always be direct or narrative. Keep in mind, the real person forms the moment of the poem. It is why to seek understand that moment. Sometimes the job of the poem is to come closer to see what cannot be said in other forms of writing, such experience, idea, or feeling that it can know but not entirely express in any direct or literal way. The techniques of word, line arrangement, sound, rhyme, and in some cases multiply the meaning words to go beyond the literal, giving you the expression of idea or feeling, the experience that you can't quite put in words, but that you know is real. Reading a poem aloud. Before you get very far with a poem, you have to read it. In fact, you can learn quite a few things about just looking at it. The title may give you some image or association to start with. Looking at the poem's shape, you can see whether the lines are continuous or broken into groups called the stanzas, and how long the lines are, so how dense on the physical level the poem is. You can also see whether it looks like the last poem you read about the same poet, or even poem by another poet. Some of these are good quality to notice, and they may lead you to a better understanding of the poem in the end. But sooner or later, you're going to have to read the poem word by word. To begin, read the poem aloud. Read it more than once. Listen to your voice, to the sound the words make. Do you notice any special effects? Do any of the words rhyme? Either a clause or sound that is saying the same or similar? Either section of the poem that seems to have a rhyme that is distinct from the rest of the poem. Don't worry about why the poem might use this effect. The first step is to hear what's going on. You find your own voice distracting, have a friend to read the poem to you. Okay, I'm gonna have you guys read poem for me. That said, it can still be uncomfortable to read aloud or to make more than one pass through a poem. Some of these attitudes come from the misconception that we should understand a poem after we first read it, while some stems from a sheer embarrassment. Where could I possibly go to read aloud? What if my friends hear me? Good question. Let me continue. The line. What determines where a line stops in poetry? There is, of course, more than one answer to this question. Lines are often determined by meaning, sound, rhyme, breath, or typography. Poets may use several of these elements at the same time. Some poems are metrical in the strict sense. But what if the lines aren't metrical? What if the lines are irregular? The relationship between meaning, sound, and movement intended by the poet is sometimes hard to recognize, but there is an interplay between the grammar of the line, the breadth of the line, the way lines are broken out in the poem. This is called lineation. For example, lines that end with punctuation called end-stop lines are fairly simple. In that case, the punctuation, the lineation, and perhaps even breathing coincide to make the reading familiar and predictable. But lines that are not end-stop present different challenges for readers because they either end with an incomplete phrase or sentence, or the bit before the first punctuation mark is read, like this sound. Whoa! Going on. A long breath can be that. Nobody hear my joke. I'm too serious, obviously, in the former session. Okay, Benji, break the silence, okay? So, the most natural approach is to pay strict attention to the grammar, punctuation, reading to the end of phrase or sentence if it carries over one or several lines is the best way to retain the grammatical sense of a poem. But lineation introduces another variable that some poets use to their advantage. Robert Creeley is perhaps best known for breaking lines across expected grammatical poses. This technique often introduces a secondary meaning, sometimes ironic contrast with the actual meaning of the complete grammatical phrase. Consider this line from Creeley's poetry language. Locked eye, love you son, were yin, teeth and eyes, bide bard. What? That's nonsense to me, sorry. Reading the lines as written, as opposed to their grammatical relationship, yield some strange meaning. Locked seems to indicate the search for identity. Indeed it may, but the next line, which continues with love you some, seems to make a diminishing statement about a relationship. On its own, eyes bite is a word disturbing. Hearing Creeley read his poem can often be described. It supposes the end of his line. And this poses create a kind of tension on counterpoint in relation to the poem's sentence structure. Is a halting, hesitant, breathless style is immediately recognizable. It presents the writer with a new idea about meaning purely through lineation. But many poets who break lines disregarding grammatical units do so only for visual irony, sometimes that it may be lost in performance. among many people, free words, even experiment poses today, there are those who do not interrupt grammatical sense when reading a poem aloud as much as they interpret it in the poem's typography. What to do as a reader? Try a variety method you found to clearly-eyes. Wow, okay, any poem. Just to hear what the lineation is doing. But if the results seem to distract from the poet's impact in terms of imagery or concept, drop the literature element, the lines break and read for grammar or visual image. Reading a poem several ways allow you to see further into the poem simply through repetition. Suppose we use techniques drawn from music, particularly jazz, such as Michael S. Harper or Yosef Homoyankaya, or poets like Walt Whitman, that's known as a favorite for a timeist, will employ unusual long lines as there may be another guiding principle, breath. Some poets think of the words as music flowing from a horn. They think of phrases way symphonists might. Poems composed in this way have varied line lengths, but they have a musicality in the lineation and the naturalness to their performance. They may have a recognizable sense of a measure, an equivalent duration between lines, or for the sake of contrast, rhythmic pattern of duration that give way to successive variations. For some poems, visual impact may also be important. In shape poetry, as well as many other types of writing, they are meant to be seen as a painting might be seen in lines determined by its placement in space. Some visually oriented poems present a real challenge in that the course of the poem may not be entirely clear. Visual choices presented by the poet may be confusing. Sometimes, arrangement of words on the page are intended to represent different voices in a dialogue or even a more complex discourse on the subject. Overlapping, layering might be the poet's intent, which no single voice can achieve. It's best to be aware that poems with multiple voices or focuses exist, and again, looking for the inherent rules that determine the shape of the poem is the best approach. Remember then, the use of this technique in any combination pushes the words of the poem beyond the literal meanings. To find more in the poem than the words alone convey, then something larger is at work, making the poem more than the sum of its parts. No, I can continue.
Starting the conversation. We mentioned earlier that encountering a difficult poem is like a game or a sport, say rock climbing, that makes you work a bit. The idea of finding handholds and footholds and ascending in one bit at a time is apt. But some climbs are easier than others. Some are very easy. You may enjoy an easy climb for a while, but you may also find that you want a bigger challenge. Reading poetry works the same way, and fortunately, poets leave trails to help you look for the way up a poem. You'll have to do some work, hard work in some cases, but most of the time the trails are there for you to discover. The best way to discover and learn about a poem is through shared inquiry discussion. Although your first experience of the poem may be private and personal, talking about the poem is a natural and important next step. Beginning with a focused question about the poem, the discussion addresses various possible answers to the question, reshaping and clarifying it along the way. The discussion should remain grounded in the text as much as possible. Responses that move away from what is written into personal anecdotes or tangential leaps should be gently urged back into analyzing the text. The basis for shared inquiry is close reading. Good readers dirty the text with notes in the margins. They make the inquiry their own. Talking back to a poem. It would be convenient if there were a short list of universal questions, ones that could be used anytime with any poem. In the absence of such a list, here are a few general questions that you might ask when approaching a poem for the first time. Who is the speaker? What circumstances give rise to the poem? What situation is presented? Who or what is the audience? What is the tone? What form, if any, does the poem take? How is form related to content? Is sound an important active element of the poem? Does the poem spring from an identifiable historical moment? Does the poem speak from a specific culture? Does the poem have its own vernacular? Does the poem use imagery to achieve a particular effect? What kind of figurative language, if any, does the poem use? If the poem is a question, what is the answer? If the poem is an answer, what is the question? What does the title suggest? Does the poem use unusual words or use words in an unusual way? You can fall back on these questions as needed, but experience suggests that since each poem is unique, such questions will not go the necessary distance. In many instances, knowing who the speaker is may not yield any useful information. There may be no identifiable occasion that inspired the poem, but poems do offer clues about where to start. Asking questions about the observable features of a poem will help you find a way in. I'll now bring inquiry to bear on two very different poems, each of which presents its own challenges. The Red Wheelbarrow by William Carlos Williams and Diving into the Wreck by Adrian Rich. Text and content. Some people say that a poem is always an independent work of art and that readers can make full sense of it without having to use any source outside the poem itself. Others say that no text exists in a vacuum. However, the truth lies somewhere in between. Most poems are open to interpretation without the aid of historical context or knowledge about the author's life. In fact, it's often best to approach a poem without the kind of preconceived ideas that can accompany this kind of information. Other poems, however, overtly political poems in particular, will benefit from some knowledge of the poet's life and times. The amount of information needed to clearly understand depends on you and your encounter with the poem. It's possible, of course, even for someone with a deep background in poetry to be unaware of certain associations or implications in a poem. This is because poems are made of words that accumulate new meanings over time. Consider this situation of a true story of a poet who found a text at the San Mateo coast in Northern California. As she scrambled over rocks behind the beach near the artichoke fields that separate the shore from the coast highway, she found a large smear of graffiti painted on the rocks, proclaiming La Raza, a Chicano political slogan meaning the struggle. She sat down and wrote a poem. Why? Her poem asked. I understand, she wrote, why someone would write La Raza on the side of a building or on public transport. There it would be seen and would shout its protests from the very foundations of the oppressive system. But why here, in nature and beauty, so far from that political arena? Couldn't you leave the coast unspoiled? Then one evening while reading the poem in Berkeley, she got her answer. A man came up to her and asked her, do you want to know? I beg your pardon, she said. Those fields, the man went on, were where Chicanos had been virtually enslaved, beaten, and forced to live in squalor for decades. The landscape was not innocent of political struggle. The text was not out of place. Embrace ambiguity. Here's a tricky issue. The task is to grasp, to connect, to understand. But such a task is to some degree impossible, and most people want clarity. At the end of class, at the end of the day, we want revelation, a glimpse of the skyline to the lifting fog. Aesthetically, this is understandable. Some magic, some satisfaction, some is one of the rewards of any reading, and particularly the reading of poetry. But a poem that reveals itself completely in one or two readings will, over time, seem less of a poem than one that constantly reveals subtle recesses and previously unrecognized meanings. Here's a useful analogy. A life partner, a husband, a wife, these are people with whom we hope to constantly renew our love. Despite the routine, the drone of familiarity, the daily preparation of meals and doing of dishes, the conversations we've had before, we hope to find a sense of discovery, of surprise. The same is true of poems. The most magical and wonderful poems are ever renewing themselves, which is to say, they remain ever mysterious. Too often we resist ambiguity. Perhaps our lives are changing so fast that we long for stability somewhere, and because most of the reading we do is for instruction or information, we prefer it without shades of gray. We want it to be predictable and easy to digest. And so difficult poetry is the ultimate torment. Some literary critics would link this as well to the power of seeing, the relationship between subject and object. We wish the poem to be object so we can possess it through our seeing its internal workings. When it won't allow us to objectify it, we feel powerless. Torment, powerlessness, these are the desired ends? Well, no, the issue is our reaction, how we shape our thoughts through words. We have to give up our material attitude, which makes us want to possess the poem. Maybe we've bought the book, but we don't own the poem. We have to cultivate a new mindset, a new practice of enjoying the inconclusive. Embracing ambiguity is a much harder task for some than others. Nothing scares some people like the idea, even the idea of improvisation as a writing or analytical tool. Some actors hate being without a script. The same is true of some musicians. Ask even some excellent players to improvise and they start to sweat. Of course, actors and musicians will say that there's mystery in what they do with a script or a score, and it would be pointless to disagree. The point, after all, is that text is mysterious. Playing the same character night after night, an actor discovers something in the lines, some empathy for the character that he or she had never felt before. Playing or listening to a song for the 100th time, if it is a great song, will yield some new interpretation and discovery. So it is with great poetry.
So it was great poetry. Well, we didn't give just any chance, but we gave a lot of chance from the comments. Share your reading experience of poetry reading appreciation, brothers.
Of what
Your experience of reading poems, appreciating poems, forget you do loud poems. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I would say, I don't think I had much of an appreciation for poetry until I got older.
Older, oh wow.
I think in many ways that can be poetry can be very challenging to read it. I think.
Yeah.
Sometimes poems come alive with lived experience. But I think the more I traveled down the road a little bit and I'm now middle-aged,
Middle age.
I think I would appreciate a lot more if I were able to go back and consider poetry, having a perspective I do now to reflect on it as younger. And so in that way, I think all of you young ones in particular, there's a really good opportunity to kind of measure your life through writing, which I find great literature and great poetry really does that, because you can read it at very different times or stages in your life and come to completely different perspectives on what it means.
Yes.
Which I think is true of any kind of pursuit that has to do with the written word, which interestingly enough to me, I would associate that with, when John talks about in the beginning was the word, the word is something that's tangible and living and moving and breathing.
Yes.
And so, I think now having that perspective, poetry is comes much more alive.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to have Justin here. Sometimes it's a traveling situation, not be able to be here. Elaine, tag along. Hopefully, okay. So, do you have anything to share about reading poetry, your appreciations, experiences, poetry?
Not really. I found that really interesting. Just this article about what he encourages reading it multiple times and questions to ask yourself in order to bring more understanding. I feel like
Reading
that's helpful.
aloud, right? It's a good way to do it. Let the poem talk back to you, something that nature. Ask relevant questions. At least questions I think were good. And in particular, stand out to you, living experience.
No, not really. I've never really been into poetry. This is
You
really-
not?
No.
Oh wow! I thought it was
It's not
not a
really.
great helper here.
No,
He said-
not a
she
bit,
said
actually.
no.
So I'm just in the same boat learning with y'all.
Yeah. Okay. No. We'll put it back on our spot. So. Okay. Now, how about you? you appreciating poetry through the years changed as well, depends as well. So sure, more as a encourage for young people to learn to read poetry, learn poetry. You don't learn, that's fine. So I don't blame you. So everybody has their hobbies. So.
I have a more profound connection with music, I think.
Music, that's right.
Poetry, I can't say, I mean, maybe I've, at a younger age too, have maybe a tad bit more experience at poetry than Elaine, but I feel like I'm kind of in a similar place to her. I don't know if I have enough experience to offer like a nice or a helpful opinion about it. I will say that despite the author's assessment of ambiguity being something that kind of pushes people away from poetry, that's what, at least for me, it kind of tends what it's kind of what tends to draw me actually, not just in the reading of poetry, but in the writing of it as well. Back when I did write poetry a little more often, I just feel like I would sometimes be taken to a place where I'm not even using my mind fully. It's just, it was actually a pretty painful place because I would write poetry super slow. And it wasn't just a struggle of putting things into the right words, although that is almost the essence of poetry because you are putting feeling and thought into words in a very, very particular way. But it's just, it would be a really odd and interesting experience to try to write poetry. And I actually could feel some something similar to what I feel in music, where you're playing things and you only really play what just the music that kind of clicks with something inside of you. And in playing the piano, sometimes I'll just stop altogether because it's not clicking right. And that's what I do in poetry. I'd be writing something like, right, no, I have to erase this tons of times. And so with poetry in that regard, I wouldn't say I had the inborn gift of poetry, because I know there are some, and that there have been some in history that can literally just write the music straight out. Or I say music because I'm thinking of Mozart right now, who would just like, it would just all come out of his mind on the paper. He would not do any erasing. It would just be all there on the sheet music out of nowhere. He doesn't even need a piano or an orchestra to test it on. Just would write it all
like
there.
talented like that. Huh?
Yeah. I'm not saying that you are therefore ungifted if you do have to really pour over and retry and stuff.
We Chinese see because 诗有别才 means to poetry requires special talents almost, so that's like you said, like music. So
I really like things, again, tying back into the ambiguous nature of it. I really like things that don't, in fact, almost defy the approach of step by step. Well, you go through step one, ask this particular question, you will receive this bit of information from the poem. Obviously, they introduce questions and they to help you to do that, but it's not. It's like the complete opposite of something like math, where it's just a step-by-step process for the most part. Logic, but it requires something really, really creative, deep in both your emotional involvement and your intellectual involvement, and it blends those two things together, where you really do have to exert your entire mental ability to pull meaning out of something. And that, I think, is actually really cool about poetry, and extends beyond poetry. It's a gift of viewing life in a certain way. That can be really
intuition.
It is kind of intuition,
Intuition.
But at least for some, like myself, at least, it doesn't come easy. It's like as it does for some, where you just kind of have it all of a sudden. I mean, everyone experiences those moments, but it requires a lot of energy. It's that kind of intuition.
For Elijah, it's easy. Elijah. It is. Oh, he said it is. I don't know about others' poetry, but Elijah poetry were good. Sometimes come from profound place. Recently, I found that Naomi's is the word texture. Maybe the thought seems understood very easily, but actually come from the deeper place of the heart, deeper place of contemplation. So, I'm not read your poems yet. Have you ever read poems?
Not really, no. I don't really express myself in that way creatively. personally, so.
You were a pretty person. You were
Yeah,
a sensitive person. You were an intuitive person. The talented in many ways. So start writing poems. So.
I can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we got criticized it. So that's good.
That sounds fun.
Sounds fun. So
Sounds
that's
really
that's
fun.
where
Can't
we're
wait for that.
fun. Yeah. Yeah.
To spend days and pour all the effort into a
Yeah.
poem just for you to say,
Yeah.
that will feel great.
That would be very fun. Well, 12:12, we might just wrap it up. I hope everybody get a blessed day. We didn't get any major things going on. I believe, however, your heart, your spirit, your will of life is enriched. That's all we want to do. So you may not able to put in the words, but you know your life touch change. That's good. Am I, Anna? Am I? Hey, Kila, you still there? You're not making any songs. We don't know if this or not. Oh, let me show you Dan. What does he look like? So, yeah.
In case you forgot.
In case you forgot, yeah. He's doing pretty fine. Your little brother hiding in the corner. And this. Now I want you to pray for us before we wrap it up. So, yeah. If you are there, you had to unmute yourself, remember? She might be busy, who knows? Okay, I'll give you 3 seconds, okay? So. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Too many people become so awkward to manage. Somebody to help us to break the ice, stir trouble, to cheer everybody up. So there's some jokes going on. So. And right now, we need some light-hearted people, man, like you. That's all the time. Can you pray for us? Mm-hmm.
We're gonna pray for today. I pray that when we read this, we still think of you. We don't just have a set time where we praise you. We do it always.
Mhm.
I pray that our sins go well.
And I'm pray for us as well. We're prophets.
Yes, Lord, we're just also grateful that you can come into our presence and change the way we think. Pray that you would keep doing it. We don't want to push you away. Thank you so much for letting us draw near to you. We want to be close to you and we want to learn more about you. Thank you that we can all gather for this sweet time to talk about the Bible or poetry or essays or whatever, but let us do it all for your glory and never stop thinking of doing it.
Amen.
Praise in Jesus' name.
In Jesus' name. Thank you, Anna. We're going to wrap up here, okay? Everybody have a great day.